Honestly, this evening turned out perfectly.
I agree completely. I can't remember the last time I enjoyed myself this much.
The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Riverside Community Library, casting golden patterns across rows of worn paperbacks and faded hardcovers. Melody Rivers sat behind the circulation desk, her slender fingers carefully mending the torn page of a beloved children's book. At 19, she had the kind of quiet beauty that people often overlooked at first glance, soft hazel eyes that turned honey-colored in the light, chestnut hair usually pulled back in a simple braid, and a gentle demeanor that made patrons feel instantly comfortable.
Melody.
"You've been working on that same book for 20 minutes, Mrs. Patterson," the head librarian said with an affectionate smile. "Why don't you take your lunch break?" Melody glanced at the clock, surprised to find it was already past 1. She'd been so absorbed in her work that time had slipped away. This library wasn't just her workplace. It had been her sanctuary since childhood. Back when her mother was still alive and would bring her here every Saturday morning, those memories felt like pressed flowers between the pages of her life, beautiful but fragile. "I'll just finish this last page," Melody replied softly, her voice carrying the musical quality that had inspired her mother to name her. "Mrs. Williams' grandson loves this book, and she's picking it up this evening." As she carefully applied book tape to the torn spine, her phone buzzed insistently in her pocket. Melody ignored it at first, focused on getting the repair just right. But when it buzzed 3 more times in rapid succession, concern crept into her chest. The only person who ever called her repeatedly like that was Francesca, her stepmother and the source of most of her troubles. With reluctant fingers, Melody retrieved her phone and saw 5 missed calls and a text message that made her stomach drop. "Come home immediately. We need to discuss your future." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Francesca never phrased things as discussions. She issued commands, made demands, and manipulated situations to her advantage. Melody's father had been dead for 2 years, and in that time, Francesca had systematically sold off everything of value spent through the inheritance, and accumulated debts that Melody was only beginning to understand. "Go ahead, sweetheart," Mrs. Patterson said, noticing Melody's suddenly pale face. "Family comes first. We'll manage here." The bus ride to the small apartment she shared with Francesca felt endless. Melody watched the city slide past her window coffee shops filled with laughing college students, bookstores she longed to browse, restaurants she couldn't afford. Her life had become so small since her father's death, confined to work home, and the occasional visit with her best friend Ruby at the bookstore where they'd met in high school. Francesca was waiting in the cramped living room when Melody arrived, looking entirely out of place in her expensive designer outfit clothes purchased with money they didn't have. At 42, Francesca was still beautiful in a sharp, predatory way, with platinum blonde hair styled in perfect waves and makeup applied with professional precision.
"Ow."
"Melody," Francesca said, gesturing to the worn couch that had once belonged to Melody's mother. "What's this about?" Melody asked, remaining standing. Some instinct warned her that sitting would put her at a disadvantage. Francesca's painted lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I've solved all our problems, darling. Well, all my problems, really. You're just the solution I needed." Cold dread pooled in Melody's stomach. "What did you do? Winston Blackwood, you know? The billionaire investor who owns half the commercial real estate in the city, needs a wife for his son. Well, not needs exactly, wants for business purposes, tax benefits, that sort of thing. The son apparently refuses to marry anyone from their social circle. Too many complications. So Winston approached me with a proposition." The word fell from Melody's lips like a stone. "You haven't even heard the offer," Francesca continued, examining her manicured nails. $300,000. Enough to clear all my debts and set me up quite comfortably. All you have to do is marry Damien Blackwood and stay married for 1 year. After that, you're free to divorce with a generous settlement of your own." "No," Melody repeated, but her voice shook this time. "You can't sell me like property." Francesca's expression hardened. "Can't I? Who's been paying for this apartment? Who's been putting food on the table while you play librarian for minimum wage? You owe me, Melody. Your father left me with nothing but debts and a stepdaughter I never wanted. The cruelty of the words stung, but Melody had learned to expect this from Francesca. What she hadn't expected was the legal document Francesca now pulled from her designer handbag. Along with the signature line already prepared, "You're 19, technically an adult, but I'm still your legal guardian until you're 21, according to your father's will. If you refuse, I'll kick you out tonight with nothing. No references for new jobs, no help with college applications, nothing. Or you can sign this, marry Damien Blackwood tomorrow morning, and secure both our futures." The groom who wasn't what she expected. Courthouse was everything Melody had never imagined for a wedding cold fluorescent lights. Beige walls and the smell of stale coffee mixed with cleaning products. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that Ruby had helped her pick out from a thrift store the night before. When Melody had called her sobbing about the situation, "You don't have to do this," Ruby had said fiercely, her dark eyes flashing with anger. "Come stay with me. We'll figure something out." But Melody knew better. Francesca had already contacted the library board, suggesting that Melody had been stealing petty Cassia lie, but one that could destroy Melody's reputation and career before it even started. Francesca held all the cards, and they both knew it. Winston Blackwood arrived exactly on time, his silver hair perfectly groomed, his suit probably worth more than Melody made in 6 months. He barely glanced at her before turning to Francesca to discuss final financial arrangements. "The transfer will complete once the marriage license is signed," he was saying. "My son should be here any moment. He's been resistant to the idea, but he understands family obligations." Melody's hands trembled as she clutched the small bouquet. Ruby had insisted she carry wildflowers picked from the community garden behind the bookstore, tied with a ribbon from one of Melody's favorite childhood books. It was the only beautiful thing about this entire nightmare. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Melody looked up to see a man who took her breath away for entirely unexpected reasons. Damien Blackwood was nothing like she'd imagined. At 35, he had the kind of presence that filled a room, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it all morning, and ocean blue, eyes that held equal parts exhaustion and intelligence. He stopped short when he saw her, those blue eyes widening slightly. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, and Melody felt something shift in the air between them, recognition, maybe, or surprise that they were both trapped in the same cage. "You must be Melody," Damien said quietly, his voice deeper and gentler than she expected. He crossed the space between them, ignoring his father's impatient gesture. "I'm Damien. I'm sorry about all of this." The apology, unexpected and seemingly genuine, made Melody's carefully constructed composure crack slightly. "It's not your fault," she whispered. "Isn't it?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. "I should have stood up to him years ago." Before Melody could respond, the courthouse clerk appeared to usher them into the small ceremony room. What followed was a blur of legal language, cold efficiency, and the surreal moment when Damien slipped a simple gold band onto her finger with hands that were surprisingly warm. "By the power vested in me," the judge intoned in a bored voice, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. No kiss, no celebration." Just Winston immediately pulling Francesca aside to sign the financial documents, while Melody stood frozen in the middle of the room. "Now legally married to a stranger, we don't have to go through with this," Damien said suddenly, moving close enough that only she could hear. "I can write you a check right now for whatever amount you need. We can get this annulled before the day is over." Melody looked up at him, studying the earnestness in his expression, the genuine concern in his eyes. For a moment, she was tempted. But then she thought about Francesca's threats, about the library board investigation, about having nowhere to go and no one to help except Ruby, who had her own struggles. "Your father paid mine $300,000, Melody said quietly. "Where would you suggest I get that kind of money to pay back?" Damien's jaw tightened. "You don't have to pay anything back. That was his deal, not yours." "But it becomes my burden either way," Melody replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "At least this way, I know the terms." 1 year, you said? "I can survive anything for 1 year." Something flickered in Damien's expression, respect, maybe, or recognition of the steel beneath her gentle exterior. "The car is waiting," he said finally. "Let me take you home. Your real home now." Entering a golden Kajethi Blackwood estate, sat on 5 acres of manicured grounds in the most exclusive part of the city, hidden behind tall iron gates and ancient oak trees. As the car wound up the curved driveway, Melody pressed her face to the window, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of wealth on display. The mansion itself was a masterpiece of modern architecture, blended with classical elements, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that somehow still managed to feel warm rather than cold. Gardens sprawled in every direction, and Melody could see a greenhouse in the distance, its glass panels glinting in the afternoon sun. "It's too much, I know," Damien said quietly from beside her. "I grew up here, and I still feel like a visitor sometimes." The car stopped in front of the main entrance, where an older woman in a simple but elegant uniform waited on the steps. Her face was kind, with laugh lines around her eyes that suggested she smiled often. "This is Mrs. Pemberton," Damien said as they climbed out. "She's been with the family since I was a child. Mrs. Pemberton, this is Melody, my wife." The word sounded strange in his mouth, and stranger still to Melody's ears. But Mrs. Pemberton's warm smile didn't falter. Instead, she stepped forward and took Melody's cold hands in her warm ones. "Welcome home, dear," she said simply. "I've prepared the blue suite for you. I thought you might like the view of the gardens." Tears pricked Melody's eyes at the unexpected kindness. She'd expected judgment, coldness, maybe even hostility from the staff, who might see her as an interloper or gold digger. Instead, Mrs. Pemberton treated her like someone worth welcoming. Damien led her through the main entrance and up a curved staircase that could have belonged in a museum. The blue suite turned out to be a series of rooms that were larger than the entire apartment. She'd shared with Francesca a bedroom with a 4-poster bed in that promised view of the gardens, a sitting room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a bathroom with both a soaking tub and a shower that looked like something from a spa. "I had them add the bookshelves," Damien said, looking almost nervous. "My assistant mentioned you worked at a library, so I thought you might like reading. If you want different furniture or different colors or anything changed, just tell Mrs. Pemberton." Melody walked slowly to the windows, looking out over gardens that seemed to stretch forever. Roses climbed ancient stone walls, and a small pond reflected the sky like a mirror. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. It's a reminder of just how far she'd fallen into a world where she didn't belong. "Why are you being so kind?" she asked, not turning around. "Your father paid mine to make me marry you. You could treat me however you wanted, and I'd have no choice but to accept it." She heard Damien move closer, but not close enough to trap her. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but fierce. "Is that what you think? That because money changed hands, you're somehow my property?" Melody turned to face him, hugging herself against a sudden chill despite the warm room. "Isn't that exactly what this is?" "No," Damien said firmly. "This is my father and your stepmother playing games with people's lives because they can. But you and I, we don't have to play by their rules. You're my wife legally, yes, but in this house, you're free. These rooms are yours. The library downstairs is yours. The gardens, the greenhouse, anywhere you want to go is yours. And if anyone, including my father, tries to make you feel otherwise, you tell me immediately." The conviction in his voice made something tight in Melody's chest loosen slightly. She studied his face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation, but found only genuine anger on her behalf and something else she couldn't quite name. "I don't understand you," she admitted. "Why would you agree to this marriage if you hate it so much?" Damien's expression grew darker. "Because I learned a long time ago that my father gets what he wants, one way or another. If I'd refused, he would have found another man, someone who might not have cared about treating you with respect. At least this way, I could make sure you were safe." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with implications that Melody wasn't ready to examine. Before she could respond, a knock sounded at the door, and Mrs. Pemberton appeared with a tea tray. "I thought you might both need this," she said, setting the tray on the sitting room table. "Dinner is at 7, but if you'd prefer to eat up here tonight, just ring." After she left, Damien poured tea with steady hands, and Melody found herself sitting across from him in the golden afternoon light, a stranger who was now her husband. Trying to figure out how her life had taken such an impossible turn, Melody woke to unfamiliar softness sheets with a thread count. She couldn't begin to guess. Pillows that seemed to cradle her head in clouds, in morning light filtering through curtains that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. For a moment she forgot where she was, forgot about the courthouse wedding and the golden cage she now inhabited. Then reality crashed back like cold water. She was Mrs. Damien Blackwood, wife to a billionaire, living in a mansion that could house dozens of families. And despite the luxury surrounding her, she'd never felt more alone. A gentle knock at the door made her pull the covers up instinctively. "Yes, it's Mrs. Pemberton, dear. I've brought breakfast. Mr. Blackwood thought you might prefer to eat in your rooms this morning rather than face the formal dining room just yet." Melody's chest tightened at the thoughtfulness. She called for Mrs. Pemberton to enter and watched as the older woman wheeled in a cart laden with more food than Melody could eat in a week fresh fruit. Warm croissants, eggs prepared 3 different ways, in a pot of tea that smelled like heaven. "He's kind, isn't he?" Melody found herself asking. "Mr. Blackwood, I mean Damien?" Mrs. Pemberton's face softened. "He's the best man I know. I've known him since he was in short pants, causing trouble in those gardens you were admiring yesterday. His father tried to shape him into something cold and calculating, but Damien never lost his heart. He just learned to hide it better." After Mrs. Pemberton left, Melody forced herself to eat while staring out at the gardens. Somewhere out there, in the real world, Ruby would be opening the bookstore. Mrs. Patterson would be organizing the library's new arrivals, and life would be continuing without her. She felt like a princess in a fairy tale, except the tower was made of gold and the dragon was the life she'd left behind, an unexpected refuge bee mid-morning. Melody couldn't stand the isolation anymore. She ventured out of her suite, determined to explore the mansion that was now supposedly her home. The hallways were like art galleries, paintings she recognized from textbooks hung casually on walls. Sculpture occupied alcoves, and every window offered views of manicured perfection. She found the kitchen first, where a staff of 3 was preparing lunch. They looked up in surprise when she entered, and Melody immediately felt like an intruder. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I was just exploring. I didn't mean to interrupt." "Nonsense." The head cook, a round woman with flour on her apron, said warmly. "You're Mrs. Blackwood now. This is your kitchen as much as anyone's. I'm Daphne. And these troublemakers are my assistants, Carlos and Jin." They welcomed her so naturally that Melody found herself staying, watching them work and listening to their easy banter. It reminded her of the library staff, the way people who worked together long enough developed their own language and rhythms. "Mr. Blackwood never comes down here," Daphne said as she kneaded dough. "Not because he's snobbish, mind you. He just doesn't want to be in the way. But his father? That man treats the kitchen like it's beneath him to acknowledge we exist." And the comment painted a clearer picture of the household dynamics. When Melody finally left, she felt slightly less alone. She discovered the library by accident, following a hallway she thought led outside, but instead opening a door to find floor-to-ceiling shelves packed with thousands of books. The room was 2 stories tall, the rolling ladder attached to rails and comfortable reading chairs positioned near tall windows. It was, quite possibly, the most beautiful room Melody had ever seen. "I hoped you'd find this place," Damien's voice said from behind her, making her jump. He stood in the doorway, dressed more casually than yesterday in dark jeans and a simple sweater that somehow made him look more approachable. "My mother designed this library. She loved books almost as much as she loved my father, back when he was capable of being loved." Melody turned back to the shelves, running her fingers along spines. "What happened to her?" "Cancer. When I was 12, Damien said quietly, moving to stand beside her. "She made me promise to never let his coldness turn me into him. Some days, I wonder if I've kept that promise." Without thinking, Melody reached out and touched his arm. "You have," she said softly. "I can tell." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, maybe, or the beginning of trust. Damien cleared his throat and gestured to the shelves. Everything here is yours to read. There's also a greenhouse library attached to the main greenhouse, full of botanical books and my mother's garden journals. I thought you might like that too. The business dinner that changed everything 3 days into her new life. Damien appeared at her door looking uncomfortable in a tuxedo. I have a business dinner tonight, he said. Investors, partners, the usual crowd. My father insists you attend. He wants to show off his son's unexpected marriage. LD's stomach dropped. I don't know how to navigate that world. Just be yourself, Damien said. That'll confuse them enough. The dinner was held in the mansion's formal dining room, which could easily seat 30 people. Tonight there were 12 all men, except for Melody and 2 wives, who looked at her with expressions, ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disdain. Winston Blackwood presided at the head of the table, introducing Melody as his new daughter-in-law, with a possessive pride that made her skin crawl. Quite a surprise. This marriage, one of the investors said, studying Melody over his wine glass. No one even knew Damien was dating anyone. It was rather sudden, Winston agreed smoothly. But when you find the right person, why wait? Melody caught Damien's jaw tightening, but he said nothing. The dinner conversation turned to business mergers and acquisitions, stock prices, political maneuvering. Melody tried to fade into the background, but fate had other plans. The Riverside Community Center project, one investor, Julian Cross, was saying, I still say it's a waste of resources. That neighborhood is dying. Better to tear it down and build luxury condos. Melody's fork clinked against her plate, the sound sharp in the momentary silence. Every eye turned to her, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. But then she thought about Mrs. Patterson, about the children who came to the library for free homework help, about the families who depended on that community center. That neighborhood isn't dying, she said, voice quiet but steady. It's being neglected. There's a difference. Julian's eyebrows rose. I'm sorry? The Riverside Community Center serves over 300 families, Melody continued, surprised by her own boldness. It has the only free library branch in that district, after-school programs that keep kids off the streets, and senior services for elderly residents. Tearing it down wouldn't revitalize the neighborhood. It would destroy the heart of it. And you know this how? Winston asked coldly. Because I worked at that library, Melody said, meeting his gaze. I know those families. I know what they need. And it's not luxury condos they can't afford. The silence that followed felt heavy. Then Damien's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. Melody's right, he said. I've been reviewing the Riverside project myself. The community impact assessment was poorly done. We should be looking at renovation and expansion, not demolition. Julian's face hardened. With all due respect, Damien, this is business, not charity work. Then let's talk business, Melody said, surprising herself again. What's the cost of bad publicity when you destroy a community center? What's the cost in delayed permits when residents protest? What's the cost in your company's reputation when people realize you're displacing families for profit? She could feel Damien's surprise, feel Winston's barely concealed anger, but she couldn't stop. Months of being silenced by Francesca, years of watching people in power ignore the powerless sit, all came pouring out in careful, mesured arguments backed by facts she knew from working in that community. When she finally stopped talking, Julian Cross was staring at her with new interest. You make good points, he admitted grudgingly. Perhaps we should revisit the proposal. Midnight revelations. Melody couldn't sleep that night. The dinner had left her wired, alternating between pride at having spoken up and terror at having overstepped. She slipped out of her rooms wearing one of the silk robes Mrs. Pemberton had left for her and made her way through the darkened mansion to the library. She found Damien there, sitting in one of the reading chairs with a tumbler of scotch and an open book he clearly wasn't reading. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression made her breath catch. I'm sorry, she blurted out. About dinner. I shouldn't have spoken out like that. I probably embarrassed you in front of your investors. It's embarrassed me. Damien set down his glass and stood. Melody, you were brilliant. You did in 10 minutes what I've been trying to do for months, made them actually think about the human cost of their decisions. Sure. Father looked furious. Father is always furious when someone shows more intelligence and compassion than him, Damien said, moving closer, which is most of the time. Melody found herself studying his face in the lamplight, the strong jawline, the way shadows played across his features, the genuine admiration in his eyes. "Why did you marry me?" she asked suddenly. "Really? You could have refused, found another way." Damien was quiet for a long moment. "Because I saw your picture," he admitted finally. "My father showed it to me when he was explaining his plan, trying to make it sound like a business merger. But I looked at your eyes in that photo. I saw something he didn't. Strength. Kindness. The kind of person who'd been hurt, but hadn't let it make them cruel. And I thought, if I had to be trapped in a loveless marriage of convenience, at least I could make sure you weren't trapped with someone who'd hurt you more." Tears pricked Melody's eyes. "That's the saddest romantic thing anyone's ever said to me," Damien asked, his voice dropping lower. He was close now, close enough that she could smell his Collins, something woodsy and warm. "I've been trying not to be, trying to give you space, let you adjust. But Melody, watching you tonight, seeing you stand up for what you believe in, hearing you speak with such passion," he stopped, seeming to catch himself. "I'm sorry. This isn't fair to you. You didn't choose this, neither did you," Melody whispered. And then, before she could second-guess herself, she closed the distance between them and pressed her lips to his. The kiss started gentle, tentative, like they were both afraid of breaking something fragile. But then Damien's arms came around her, pulling her close, and Melody felt herself melting into the warmth of him. His hands tangled in her hair and she gripped his shirt, and suddenly the kiss deepened into something that made her head spin. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Damien rested his forehead against hers. "This changes things," he said quietly. "Maybe it was always going to change," Melody replied. "Maybe we were just pretending it wouldn't." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Ruby Chen burst into the mansion, demanding to see Melody with such fierce determination that even Mrs. Pemberton was charmed. "Are you okay?" Ruby demanded, pulling Melody into a tight hug. "You haven't answered my texts? I was ready to storm this place with pitchforks." Melody laughed, the sound surprising her. "I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. Go over tea. In the greenhouse library." Melody told Ruby everything at the business dinner, standing up to the investors. The midnight kiss that had turned into hours of talking and more kissing in the library. Ruby listened with wide eyes, occasionally interrupting with colorful commentary about Winston Blackwood's character. "So you're actually falling for him?" Ruby asked carefully. "This isn't just Stockholm Syndrome or trauma bonding or something?" Melody considered the question seriously. "I don't know what it is yet," she admitted. "But I know that when I'm with Damien, I feel seen in a way I haven't since my mother died. He listens when I talk. He values my opinions. He makes me feel like I matter." "Then I'm happy for you," Ruby said, squeezing her hand. "But I'm also keeping my pitchforks handy, just in case." The strategy session. That afternoon, Damien invited Melody to his home office, a sleek space with glass walls overlooking the gardens. His assistant Thomas was there along with several senior managers from Blackwood Enterprises. "I want Melody involved in the Riverside project," Damien announced. "She has insights into the community that none of us possess." Melody's heart raced as professional eyes turned to her with varying degrees of skepticism. But Damien's steady presence beside her gave her courage. "Tell them what you told me last night," he said quietly. "About the library programs the community needs. The actual solutions." So Melody did. She talked about the after-school tutoring that kept kids engaged in learning. About the senior lunch program that fought isolation and food insecurity. About the job training classes that helped people get back on their feet. She pulled out data she'd gathered over years of working there. Statistics about community programs reducing crime and increasing property values over time. "What you're proposing isn't just renovation," Thomas said thoughtfully. "It's a complete reimagining of corporate community engagement." "Exactly," Damien said. Instead of treating low-income neighborhoods as problems to be solved or opportunities to be exploited, we partner with them. We invest in what they need, not what we think they should have. By the end of the meeting, they had the framework for a proposal that could change everything, not just for Riverside, but for how Blackwood Enterprises approach development citywide. Melody felt electric with possibility, her mind racing with ideas. "You're a natural at this," Damien said after everyone left. They stood at the window, watching gardeners work in the flower beds below. "Have you ever thought about going back to school? Studying urban planning or social work or something related?" "With what money?" Melody asked automatically, then caught herself. "Sorry, I'm still adjusting to this whole billionaire wife thing." Damien turned to face her fully. "It's your money too now, Melody. Legally, financially, all of it. You could go to any university in the world. Study whatever you want. I'll support you however I can." The offer was overwhelming in its generosity. Melody had given up on college dreams years ago, when Francesca made it clear there would be no financial support. Now, suddenly, the world had cracked open again with possibilities. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Thank you." Damien's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally now. "We're partners, remember? Your dreams matter just as much as mine." The Charity Gala Showdown, Metropolitan Gala, was the social event of the Seasona Massive fundraiser, where the city's elite gathered to see and be seen while writing checks for causes they barely understood. Damien had wanted to skip it, but Winston had insisted his new daughter-in-law make her debut in society. Melody wore a midnight blue gown that Mrs. Pemberton had helped her select. Simple but elegant, that made her feel like a different person. Or maybe not different, maybe. Just more like the person she'd always been underneath Francesca's criticisms and constraints. "You're stunning," Damien said when she emerged from her rooms. He wore a tuxedo with casual elegance, but his eyes held something warmer than mere appreciation. "Are you ready for this circus?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Melody replied. Taking his offered arm, the ballroom was a fantasy of crystal chandeliers and champagne fountains, filled with designer gowns and jewelry worth more than small countries. Melody felt eyes tracking their entrance, heard whispers following in their wake. The mysterious Mrs. Blackwood, married so suddenly, no social pedigree or family connections worth mentioning. Winston appeared almost immediately. Francesca draped on his arm like an expensive accessory. Melody's stepmother wore victory on her face like makeup, clearly thrilled to be attending as Winston's guest. "My dear daughter-in-law," Winston said with false warmth, "don't you look lovely?" Quite the transformation. Beside him, Francesca's smile was sharp. "Doesn't she, though? I always knew she had potential under all that bookish ordinariness. A few good dresses can work wonders." Melody felt Damien tense beside her. But before he could respond, Julian Krause materialized from the crowd. "His wife on his arm?" "Blackwood," Julian said, nodding to Damien before turning to Melody. "Mrs. Blackwood, I've been thinking about your comments at dinner last week. My team has been looking into similar community partnership models, and the data is quite compelling." "Really?" Melody asked, surprise clear in her voice. "Really?" Julian confirmed. "In fact, I'd like to propose a meeting next week to discuss potential collaboration on the Riverside project. If Blackwood Enterprises is willing to share the vision, Cross Development would be interested in joining as a partner rather than a competitor." Melody watched Winston's expression darken, saw Francesca's confusion at this unexpected development. "We'd welcome that conversation," Damien said smoothly, his hand finding the small of Melody's back in a gesture of support and pride as Julian moved away. Winston stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "What exactly do you think you're doing, boy? That project was supposed to be handled my way." "Your way destroys communities," Damien replied, his voice equally quiet but threaded with steel. "We're doing this differently, because of her." Winston glanced dismissively at Melody. "Because some little nobody who works in a library suddenly fancies herself an expert in business." "Enough," Melody said, the word coming out stronger than she expected. She turned to face Winston directly, no longer the frightened girl who'd stood in the courthouse 3 weeks ago. "I may not have your experience or credentials, but I have something you've clearly forgotten. I actually care about the people your decisions affect. And if that makes me a nobody in your eyes, then I'm proud to be one." "How dare you," Winston started, but Melody wasn't finished. "Another thing," she continued, voice rising slightly. "You may have arranged this marriage. You may think you bought me like property, but you don't own me. You don't own Damien either, though he's been too dutiful to tell you so himself. This partnership," she gestured between herself and Damien, "is ours, not yours. And we'll run our lives and our projects the way we see fit." The nearby conversations had gone quiet, people pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Francesca's face had gone pale, and Winston looked like he might actually explode. "Perhaps we should take this somewhere private," Damien suggested, though his expression showed clear pride in Melody's outburst. "No," Winston said coldly. "I think we're done here. Enjoy your little partnership while it lasts. Both of you will learn that going against me has consequences." He stalked away, Francesca hurrying after him on her impossibly high heels. Melody watched them go, her heart pounding, but her stance steady. "That," Damien said quietly, "was magnificent." Melody turned to find him looking at her with such open admiration that her breath caught. "Was it? I might have just made everything worse." "You stood up to him," Damien said. "In all my 35 years, I've never managed to do that publicly. You did it after knowing him for 3 weeks. The music swelled around them as the orchestra started a waltz. Damien held out his hand. "Dance with me?" Melody took it without hesitation, letting him lead her onto the floor. As they moved together, she was aware of all the eyes still watching them, of the whispers following their every step. But somehow, in Damien's arms, none of it mattered. "I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly, his lips close to her ear. "I know this started as a contract, as convenience, as something neither of us chose. But Melody, somewhere between the courthouse and tonight, you became the best choice I never knew I needed." Tears pricked Melody's eyes. "I love you too," she whispered back. "I didn't want to. I tried not to. But you made it impossible not to." The waltz ended, but they stayed in each other's arms for a moment longer. The world reduced to just the two of them. When they finally pulled apart, Melody saw Ruby standing at the edge of the ballroom, having somehow convinced security to let her in. Her best friend gave her a thumbs up and a grin that said, "I told you so," without words, forging their own future. The next morning, Melody woke to find Damien in her sitting room, dressed casually with 2 coffee cups and a newspaper. "I thought we could have breakfast together," he said, "and plan our next move." "Our next move?" Melody asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. Damien spread the newspaper on the table. The society pages featured a photo from last night's gala. Melody and Damien on the dance floor, looking at each other with expressions that left no doubt about their feelings. The headline read, "Love Match or Business Merger. Blackwood's mysterious bride takes society by storm." "My father's going to make things difficult," Damien said seriously. "He doesn't like losing control, and we made it very clear last night that he no longer controls either of us." "What can he actually do?" Melody asked. "He owns 40% of Blackwood Enterprises," Damien explained. "I own 51%, which gives me control, but he can make things uncomfortable. He'll fight our Riverside proposal, try to turn other board members against us, even go to the press with some manufactured scandal." Melody thought for a moment, sipping her coffee. "What if we go public first? What if we present our vision directly to the community, show them what we want to build, get them on board before your father can poison the well?" Damien's eyes lit up. "A public forum. Open to Riverside residents, local press, community leaders. We present the proposal directly to the people it will affect most." "Exactly," Melody said, feeling excitement build. "And if the community supports it, the board will have a much harder time voting it down. Public opinion matters, especially for a company that depends on city contracts and community goodwill." They spent the rest of the morning planning, Thomas joining them via video call to start coordinating logistics. Ruby arrived with pastries from her favorite bakery and stayed to offer marketing insights from her small business perspective. Mrs. Pemberton kept everyone caffeinated and fed, her approval of Melody's influence on Damien clear in every warm smile. By afternoon, they had a plan. The community forum would be held in 2 weeks at the Riverside Community Center itself. They'd present detailed proposals, answer questions, and give residents real input into the final design. It was risky giving the community veto power over a corporate development project, but it felt right. Whatever happens, Damien said as the sun set over the gardens. They'd been discussing plans all day. We face it together. Melody leaned into his side, feeling the solidness of him. The warmth and security she'd never expected to find in an arranged marriage. Together, she agreed. That night, they sat in the greenhouse library, surrounded by his mother's journals and the scent of growing things. Melody read passages about garden design while Damien worked on his laptop, their comfortable silence broken only by occasional comments or laughter. "Melody?" Damien said suddenly, closing his laptop. "Yes. When this year is up, when the contract terms are fulfilled," do you think he paused, seeming uncertain? "Would you want to stay married? Really married, I mean? Not because of any agreement or obligation, but because you choose to." Melody set down the journal, her heart full. "Damien Blackwood, are you proposing to your own wife?" "I suppose I am," he said with a slight smile. "I'm asking you to marry me again, for real this time. No contracts, no terms, just us choosing each other freely." Melody crossed to where he sat, taking his hands in hers. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, to choosing you. Yes, to choosing us. Yes, to whatever comes next as long as we face it together." When he kissed her, it tasted like promise, like future, like a story that was just beginning to unfold. Outside, stars appeared one by one over the gardens, marking the end of one day and the beginning of something new. 2 weeks later, the community forum filled the Riverside Center to capacity. Melody stood at the podium, no longer a frightened girl being sold into marriage, but a woman who'd found her voice and her purpose. Beside her, Damien presented their vision not as a corporate overlord, but as a true partner to the community. When Winston and Francesca showed up to protest, they found themselves facing not just Melody and Damien, but an entire community standing together. Julian Cross announced his company's partnership. Ruby organized local small business support. Even Mrs. Patterson and the library staff came, speaking about what the center meant to the neighborhood. In the end, the vote was unanimous. The project would move forward, but on the community's terms, with their input shaping every decision. As Melody and Damien left the center that night, hand in hand, she realized that the forced marriage had given her something she'd never expected, not just love, but the chance to become the person she was always meant to be. Strong, confident, and finally free. The price of the marriage had been high, $300,000 that changed hands like she was property, but the value she'd found was priceless. A partnership built on respect, a love that grew from understanding, and a future she was choosing for herself. This was her story, and it was only just beginning.